Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First National Bank Alaska's 21 Paycheck Protection Program Loan Forgiveness Webinar. I'm Louis Ulmer, Business Development Manager here at First National Bank Alaska. I'm really happy you're able to join us today. I think we have some very valuable information to share with you about the PPP loan forgiveness application process. Our hosts today are First National Bank Alaska lending experts Chad Stedman and Carl Hines. Chad, say hello to our guests if you would. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Louis. Hello, everyone. Glad you joined us today. Just tell you a little bit about me personally first. I grew up on the Kenai Peninsula. My parents still reside there today. I come from a good-sized family, and I still have two brothers who live on the Kenai Peninsula. I went to good old Soldotna High School, proud Sohai star. After graduation, I moved away for a little while, but then about 10 years, I came back to the state with my wife, Rebecca. We've got 6 kids, and we love having them here. They love all the recreational opportunities that they've got here in the state of Alaska. Professionally, I'm the corporate lending director here at First National Bank Alaska. I've been with First National Bank Alaska for 10 years here in Anchorage, and I've been in banking for over 20 years. I manage the 4 commercial lending teams here in Anchorage with a total of 15 bankers. During my career, I've had a great opportunity to deal with a lot of diverse types of businesses, and all the way from construction, nursing homes, food, retail, brick plants, fishing, oil industry, service providers, and a lot of commercial real estate. We do a lot of commercial real estate at First National Bank Alaska. And what I like about being in banking the most is that your banker is a great member of your management team, and we get to help and watch those businesses grow. So we're there to help your business, not just with lending, but your cash management needs, doing acquisitions, building reserve accounts, anything that we can do. Also, we're a great resource for helping you understand, as we deal with so many different businesses, kind of helping you understand what's going on in the economy. So it's great to be part of those teams that we work with. So that's a little bit about me, Louis. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Chad. Great to have you here today. And Carl, if you'd say hello as well, please.
Thanks, Louis, and welcome everyone online. This is our 3rd webinar about PPP, and First National Bank Alaska takes pride in being Alaska's trusted PPP lender. And through the process, we've helped so many Alaskans, thousands of businesses receive funds to help them through the pandemic and beyond. And so we're getting to the forgiveness piece. And so I'm glad that everyone's here. A little bit about me. I have spent the last 18 years working for First National all throughout the state. I've worked in 8 different communities throughout the state. And now as a branch administrator, I oversee our 19 branch locations throughout the state and those lending activities. I was born and raised in Alaska, and it gives me great pride to be able to help so many businesses day to day with all their banking needs. And the last 18 months have been particularly challenging on many of our customers, and we're just happy to be here to help and work with our customers moving forward. So appreciate everyone being here and look forward to today's event.
Thanks, Carl. Great to have you guys both here today. First National Bank Alaska, we are now in our 100th year of doing business right here in Alaska. And obviously, a lot has changed over that time, but one thing that continues to remain consistent is First National's commitment to helping Alaska businesses succeed, our dedication to keeping Alaskans employed, and to continue moving the Alaska economy forward. From April 1st of 2020 through the end of May 2021, when the Paycheck Protection Program funds ran out, First National Bank Alaska did in excess of 5,500 PPP loans for in excess of $580 million. And so that's $580 million right back into the Alaska economy to help our Alaska businesses continue to operate, to help Alaskans to continue to be employed, and again, really moving that Alaska economy forward, helping those communities as well. And now, almost equally as important as getting that loan itself is getting that loan forgiven. The last thing we want businesses to have to do is repay those funds to the Small Business Administration, especially as we continue to have increased economic challenges, once again, as the COVID numbers continue to rise in Alaska here. And so that's the reason we're doing the webinar today, to really be able to show you how to go through that process. We are going to be recording the webinar today. And so afterwards, if you want to go back and take a look at it, it's the same webpage on which you registered for the webinar. And so that's the address there. Go back in the next couple of days, we will have a recording. We also have a recording from last month's webinar on the 2020 Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness. We have a different application portal for the two of those, and so that recording also is going to be there today. Chad and Carl are going to be going through a number of frequently asked questions that we receive from our customers on PPP loan forgiveness. We also are going to answer any questions that you have this morning. And so on your screen, you should see a little Q&A icon. At any point, if you have a question, click that icon, type your question in there, and hopefully we'll have time at the end of the webinar to get in there and answer those. And so with that, we're going to continue here, and we're going to start with the basics. And so, Carl, if you would do us a favor and just tell us what exactly is Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness and why borrowers have to apply for it.
Thanks, Liz. When the pandemic first hit, there were many different programs that came out to help businesses and individuals alike. And the Paycheck Protection Program was one of the most widely used programs, and it is a loan program with the funds being required to be repaid unless they're used for the eligible expenses. So when borrowers applied for a PPP loan, they gave us detailed business expenses, and that determined, based on their payroll, the eligible amount of a loan they were able to get. They were given a covered period, which was the amount of time they were allowed to use those funds. And as long as those funds were used for eligible expenses within the covered period of time, the loan will be fully forgiven. So we're at the stage now where many people have used all of those funds within the covered period. And so the next step is to apply for forgiveness. In order to meet the conditions of forgiveness, there's documentation required, and depending on the size of your loan, there's a different application for forgiveness. The loans under $150,000 are particularly simplified, which is a nice change from the previous PPP forgiveness stage. So the borrower needs to complete the application, and then based on the size of the loan and that application that they're required to use, will be required to supply documentation for to show that the funds were used for eligible expenses within the covered period of time.
Thank you, Carl. You mentioned the eligibility and the different expenses. Let's just spend a little bit of time and sort of remind folks what exactly that eligibility was and those expenses as well.
Okay, so we're going to talk first, before we get into that, just a quick reminder. You mentioned in the beginning that additional funds came out in 2021, and those funds were used for both first and second draw loans. This allowed some businesses who did not get the first round of PPP loan to apply, and it also allowed folks who did get a first round to apply for a second round if they met revenue reduction requirements. So I think you have some slides for the requirements. So the eligible, the forgiveness requirements are, as you can see, businesses must maintain the employee compensation levels, spend all proceeds on eligible expenses, and spend at least 60% on the payroll cost. And many of you listening today have had a first round. That initial spend on payroll was higher in the beginning, but SBA reduced that. So 60% must be spent on payroll cost. And that's the key points of the forgiveness are those three aspects. So Do you then have a slide for the second draw loans? Perfect. So the amounts to be eligible for a second draw, you had to use all of the first draw funds, and you couldn't have any more than 300 employees. Luckily for a large percentage of Alaskan businesses, they were easily met the 300 employee requirement. And then the last one can demonstrate a 25% reduction in gross receipts. And that could be any quarter comparable, 19 over 20, or the whole calendar year. And so what we found when we took the applications for the second round, we worked with our customers and made sure that they had that documentation. And although we didn't collect that from them, that's something that they're required to maintain on their behalf to show that they did meet that revenue reduction requirement, and if asked at a later date, may need to supply that to the SBA.
Thank you for that, Carl. The application process can be somewhat in-depth. There's a lot that goes into that. And so Chad, if you would just spend a few minutes talking about from kind of start to finish what that application process looks like for loan forgiveness.
Absolutely. Well, just so everyone knows, First National Bank has a secure online PPP loan forgiveness application portal for everyone, all of our borrowers to submit their applications and also any of the necessary documentations. Now, I believe later, Lewis, you're going to be showing our people that are attending here today how to log in and navigate through that portal. So we'll definitely go over that too, just so there's no confusion on that. So one thing I also want to just point out before we get going, though, is please note that borrowers, you really should not submit an electronic or paper application directly to the SBA. We will do that for you. The SBA has created a little bit of confusion there around that, and we don't want people to duplicate those efforts and submit one to the SBA also. Also, it could cause delays in your application if you do that. So make sure that you go ahead and use this portal and go through our portal, and we will make sure that that gets submitted to you. So once the borrower submits their forgiveness application through our online portal, we will go ahead and review that application and any of the required documentation that is also submitted. Then once we get it and we see that it is a complete package, we will review it. We have 60 days that we will review that pack. We have up to 60 days. We're going to try to do and move through these as quickly as we can. Lewis said we have quite a few to go through, and so that will take some time, but we've been given up to 60 days to review it. We'll try to get it done much quicker than that. So if we need additional information, we'll reach out to you directly through that platform and talk to you about the documentation that you need. And we'll do that directly through you. So once the SBA reviews that application, they have 90 days to review the application. We've seen all different degrees of which sometimes they've been done as fast as a week or two, and some they've taken over the 90 days. That's not many times that that's happened, but it has occurred. So you just have to remember there is a huge bottleneck at the SBA, and so it's taking them some time. So be patient with them. They've done a good job of getting through all their applications that are out there. So if a PPP loan, after it's reviewed by the SBA and it receives full forgiveness, we'll go ahead and notify in writing to you. You'll actually receive a statement, and no additional action is required at that time. You're done. You're fully forgiven. If a PPP loan is only partially forgiven or not forgiven at all, the borrower must begin making payments. You'll receive a payment notice through the bank, and it'll tell you when your payments begin and when to start making them. And so that's kind of a brief overview of the process, Lewis, of how it's going to happen.
Great, thanks, Chad. And as far as those payments, when must a borrower submit a loan forgiveness application in order to avoid having to make that first loan payment to the SBA?
Yeah, so you've got to get that application in prior to, first you have your cover period, and then you have 10 months after the last day of your covered period to get that application in. If you do not, the loan will no longer be deferred, and you have to start making your payments up until the payments are made in full.
Great. Carl, we're going to turn it over to you to discuss those loan payments a little bit more. Talk to us a little bit about how do those loan payments work? How does a borrower know whether or not and if and when a payment is due?
Thanks, Lewis. I think this is a good time to also remind everybody that the PPP loan process is a loan. The SBA came out with these funds as a loan mechanism that First National services, and we took the applications and provided those funds in the servicing, but it is a loan to SBA. So if forgiveness isn't applied for, then those payments will start, as Chad said, after those 10 months. If forgiveness is applied for and fully forgiven, there obviously would be no payments. If the loan is not fully forgiven, that's when the payments will begin. And just a little background, if the loan isn't fully forgiven, primarily for two reasons. Either A, the customer, the business was unable to spend all of the funds within the covered period, or B, they were unable to spend them on eligible expenses. When they go through the application process, or the forgiveness application process, they will know if they were able to spend those within the covered period and on eligible expenses. As Chad said, the SBA has 90 days to review those. Some of those come back and are determined that were not spent on eligible expenses. And so in those cases, the payments will begin. You'll get a statement from First National. You'll make your payment to First National. It's a loan to SBA. And those payments will be amortized over the remaining term with whatever amount was deemed unforgivable. And that first statement, Lewis, I think we're maybe talk about it later, but you'll get that first billing statement 15 days prior to your first payment being due. But if you do apply for forgiveness, even if the SBA hasn't reviewed or approved that full forgiveness, once you've applied forgiveness, the payments to continue to be deferred until SBA makes that decision.
Thanks, Carl. And if that does turn into a loan that must be repaid, what is the interest rate on that loan?
So the interest rate determined by SBA is 1%, and that interest starts accruing the day the funds were dispersed. But SBA defers that interest, and as long as the loan is fully forgiven, that interest is paid by SBA. So the interest rate on the notes is 1%, but it does not, it's covered by SBA as long as the loan is fully forgiven. Any unforgiven amount will be charged that interest rate and amortized like a standard loan.
Thanks, Carl. Follow-up question to that. What happens if a borrower makes a full loan payment on the loan before they have submitted that loan application or before they've heard back from the SBA of the status of that forgiveness, and their loan ends up being fully forgiven? Do they get that money back?
Yes, absolutely. If a payment is made on the loan and then the loan becomes is approved for full forgiveness, once those funds are received by First National from SBA, the balance of the loan is paid and the remainder will go back to the customer.
Great news. Chad, we're going to go back to the application process for just a moment. And actually, I will take this time because I'm going to answer a few questions that are coming in right now. And I failed to mention at the beginning that at the end of all the question and answer sessions, we will be taking some brief time to walk through what our application portal looks like, how to get there. I'll be providing the web page address to get in there, just give you a quick glimpse of what that process looks like. So I apologize for not mentioning that earlier. But as far as the application itself, Chad, when is the final deadline for a borrower to submit that application in order to have their loan fully or partially forgiven by the SBA?
Yep. So a borrower has all the way up until their maturity date of their loan. What that means is that you have all the way up until your last payment to apply for forgiveness. That being said, a lot of people felt like they had to get it done in that deferment period. You do not have to. However, you will have to begin making payments if you don't apply before the end of that deferred period is up. So you do have until the maturity of your note.
And how does a borrower find out what that maturity date is?
Yeah, and like Carl also said, is if you start making payments, you're going to get those back. So how does someone find out what that maturity date is? The best way to do that is really to just contact your loan officer and ask them about that maturity date. That being said, there is an easy way to also know about it is those loans that were issued prior to June 5th, 2020, they have a maturity date of 2 years from when the loan was dispersed. Anything that was after June 5th, 2020 has a 5-year maturity date from when the loan was dispersed. But like I said, if you're not sure exactly what it is, you want to confirm, talk with your loan officer. They'll tell you about how long your maturity date is and what your payment schedule looks like.
Thanks, Chad. If a borrower applies for forgiveness and the SBA comes back with a decision either to only partially forgive that loan or elects not to forgive that loan at all, and the borrower disagrees with that decision, or perhaps they didn't provide enough information, are they able to then dispute that decision? And if so, how?
Yeah, so we've had this situation where customers were not pleased with the decision that the SBA made, or they felt like some of the expenses that they made should have qualified as eligible expenses, or in some cases, maybe they missed some of the eligible expenses on their application, and so they want to appeal this decision. So there is a way to appeal the application. They can do that. The borrower must file a petition with the SBA Office of Hearings and Appeals within 30 days of the time that the SBA issued their final decision. So that's really important. So borrowers should also consult with their financial legal advisors, making sure that they understand the process, and talk with that home office of SBA here in Alaska. So there is that process. It takes a little time, but it is doable.
Thanks, Chad. So for the application itself, there are 3 different application forms that can be submitted. And again, all 3 of those forms will be available through our online application portal. Carl, will you do us a favor, spend a few minutes just explaining the difference between those 3 application forms and which borrowers are eligible for which one?
Sure. Thanks, Louis. So when the forgiveness process started, SBA came out with a form to use, which they identified as a 3508 form. And not long after they released that form, they decided that there was an opportunity to make it simpler for some borrowers that had a less complicated business structure, to make it easier for forgiveness. And so they came out with the 3508 EZ form. And this was if there was a reduction in employee levels or wages and the loan was in excess of $150,000, this was a form to be used. And then slightly after that, they decided to make it even easier for the borrowers with $150,000 or less in forgiveness amount. And so those loans have a 3508S form. So most of it is determined on loan size, and we do have a large portion which fall into the 3508S category. So when you log into the portal, it'll help you walk you through that. If it's not clear in the portal which form that you should be using, you certainly reach out to your loan officer and we can help guide you in the right direction. But it definitely pays off to use the simplest form possible. All 3 of them accomplish the same thing, but some of them require more documentation. So if you're eligible for the S form or the 3508 simple, then we highly recommend that you do use that form. And with each one of these forms, there's a little bit different amount of documentation that is required. And so if there's less documentation required, then only submit the documentation that's required, because once it's submitted in the portal, that becomes part of the record, and we want to try and make it as simple and as efficient as possible for not only the customer, but also for the review process from the SBA. So each form requires a little bit different documentation. The S form is the least amount of documentation. And so don't submit any more documentation than you need to. We want to keep it simple for you and simple for the SBA to be able to approve these as quick as possible.
Thanks, Carl. And if a borrower does not qualify for the 35S, they are required to submit documentation. What documentation is required, or how does a borrower know exactly what they need to submit in our online portal with their application?
Well, the good news, Lewis, depending on the form, the portal walks you through the documentation that you need to submit, and that can all be uploaded. You can go in and out of the portal. If it requests something and you don't have that handy, you can upload that later. The loan officer will also be reviewing that once it's submitted. If we feel that there was something that was missed or needs to be expanded on, we can send that back and you can upload what's needed. Once we submit it to the SBA, there is a chance that even if you've submitted everything that says was required by the portal, the SBA does reserve the right to request more documentation. And there's some documentation that isn't required to be submitted, but when you read through the disclosures, it is something that the customer needs to retain. So watch the disclosures. It will tell you exactly what needs to be uploaded, and it also tells you what needs to be retained and could be asked for at a later date by the SBA.
Thanks, Carl. And just to be safe, in order to avoid any kind of issues with that, how long should borrowers retain the necessary records?
So the SBA does say that those need to be retained for 3 years. Many of these records are your payroll and expense records, which may have a longer retention for businesses, or maybe something that they keep even longer than that. But specific to the SBA request, they do say that within 3 years they could ask for that documentation. So that's what we'll recommend. Make sure you follow that and you're prepared if something does get asked for at a later date, that you can prove that forgiveness.
Thanks, Carl. One of the things Carl mentioned was that the SBA continues to try to make the forgiveness application process more streamlined and easier for borrowers. A very hot topic that has just come up recently is something called the COVID revenue reduction score. And that's one more thing that the SBA is rolling out to try to help that forgiveness process. Chad, I'm going to turn it over to you, and if you'll just chat a little bit about that COVID revenue reduction score and what that means to our borrowers.
Absolutely. Like you said, Lewis, this has been a hot topic. And as Carl mentioned previously, in order for borrowers to be eligible for that second draw, they were required to certify that their business experienced a revenue reduction of 25% or greater from 2020 to 2019. So the SBA, in order to kind of streamline the application process for borrowers who had smaller loans, the SBA implemented a COVID revenue reduction score. This was an alternative form of revenue reduction confirmation for forgiveness of second draw PPP loans. It really is it's a great idea. I'll give it to them on that. The borrower meets the eligibility requirements, they receive a pass score. It's as simple as that. And they're not required to submit any further documentation with their application to demonstrate that revenue reduction. So let me repeat that one more time. If you got a pass score, you do not have to submit any more documentation, and you don't have to prove that you had the 25% reduction at that time. They're relying on your certification that you experienced that reduction. So let's talk a little bit about how this eligibility for this score was figured out here. So first, this applies only to second draw PPP loans. First draw loans do not have the revenue reduction requirement, so they will not receive a score, even if they received their loan in 2021. We were amazed at how many people actually applied, and it was great to see so many first-time ones, but they will still have to follow the same requirements as the first round PPP loans. So the next one, number 2, the loan has to be $150,000 or less. Pretty straightforward on that one. The next one, the score only applies if the borrower did not submit documentation of revenue reduction at the time of the loan application. So if it was already proven, it was already then we have that on file and we're good to go from there. So pretty neat process. If the borrower doesn't meet all 3 of these conditions, they're not eligible for a pass score, and therefore they're subject to the normal documentation requirements. So either you get a pass or you get a fail, and that way. But I'm just going to reiterate again, make it simple on us, make it simple on you, make it simple on the SBA. If you receive a pass score, you're not required to submit any more documentation, just the application.
And how does the borrower find out if they were lucky enough to get a pass score and qualify for that reduction?
Well, like I said, they either get that pass or that fail. And what was neat is an independent third-party SBA contractor developed the score. It was based on a variety of factors, including their industry, geography, the business size. The SBA hasn't told us much more than that as far as the qualifiers, and how each one of those came into effect. All they tell us is whether the borrower receives a pass or a fail. Very simple. The best way to do that is to contact your loan officer. We've provided them with a list of those people who have passed, and that won't have to supply any more documentation except for the application. So like I said, just to reiterate, make it easy on everyone. If you do submit documentation, then we do need to review it, and we'll ask questions about it otherwise. So if you don't need to submit it, don't submit any additional documentation.
Thank you, Chad. So we've covered a lot about the forgiveness eligibility, the forgiveness process, and I want to spend a little bit of time walking everyone through the forgiveness application portal of ours. And so on your screen here, you should see the web page address to go to in order to sign into the portal. This is the same web page address that you used when you applied for your loan in the first place. This portal only applies to PPP loans taken out in 2021. And that's regardless if it was your first loan or your second draw loan. This is the portal that you're going to want to go to start that process. If you want more information about applying for your 2021 Paycheck Protection Program loan, you do have a separate portal for that one. This is the webpage application portal there for the 2020 loan forgiveness. We did do a webinar last month that includes a lot of the same just general information that we've covered today, but it also includes a walkthrough of that portal. So we encourage you to go back to our webinar webpage. You can find the recording from July, and that's going to walk you through it. But for today, right now, we're going to go through the 2021 portal, give you just a brief summary of what that looks like to help with the process. And so when you log in using that address, it's going to bring you into the login screen. You're going to use the same email and password that you used during the loan application process. If you submitted your loan application using a paper application, or if you can't remember what email address you used when you did the initial application, send us an email. This is our forgiveness help desk, so to speak. And they're going to be able to let you know which email address you used. Or again, if you submitted it using a paper application, they're going to send you a link, an invitation link to be able to create a new portal web page. And so if you do need to get a new link in order to go into our portal there, once after you've emailed us, you will receive an email from client@streetshares.com. And what that's going to have at the bottom of the email, there's going to be a little link that you'll click there in order to start your application. Once you click that link, it is going to walk you through. It's going to ask you to select a password. That will be the password that you'll use. And again, you'll be using the email address at which you received this welcome email. So once you've selected an email and a password, you'll get another email from the client shares email address, and that'll give you a link that goes directly into your portal. So once you go into that portal, it's going to take you to your loan dashboard. And this might look familiar when you're going through the PPP loan process, but now it's been updated to show the PPP loans that you have, as well as any forgiveness applications. So if you see on the screen here, the first and the third line there that shows it's a first draw and a second draw, that's the actual loan application itself. And then the second and fourth bullets, you'll see those are the forgiveness applications. One question that we did receive from one of our guests here today is whether or not the portal is open. The answer is yes. So you may go in to the address that we showed you a few slides ago and start that forgiveness application process. Again, it's for 2021 loans only, and use the other webpage address for your 2020 loan forgiveness. But this is your dashboard. This is just going to kind of show you a little bit about it. And on this dashboard, you're going to use this to begin a new forgiveness application, to resume an application that you have in process, and then also to be able to go back and check the status of that application. That's another question that we have coming in, is if you've applied through the portal, how do you go back there and find out what it is? And it's going to be on the same webpage. Once you click the new application on the very bottom where it says start a new forgiveness application, the very first screen, so there we go, click to start a new application. The first thing you're going to see is what's called an eligibility check. And Carl mentioned previously that there are 3 different application forms: the 3508S, the 3508EZ, and then the 3508. And what our portal does is tries to make it as simple as possible for you by right off the bat trying to help you decide which application is best for you. And so once you're on this screen here on the new forgiveness application screen, you're going to click that not started box, and that is going to take you to 3 eligibility questions here. So what you'll see is there are little 3 toggle windows there that's going to ask the question, and that's going to let you know whether you qualify for one of the easier, the more simplified applications. So answer those questions, click finish. And what that will do is it'll walk you directly into the application that is best for you. And so what you'll see on the screen once you've hit submit there and you've clicked finish, if you do qualify for the 3508S form, again, those are for Paycheck Protection Program loans of $150,000 or less, it is going to pull up this screen here, which is your loan forgiveness application in the online portal. As you can see, it is very brief. You have your business information, the forgiveness amount, where you're just going to type in the amount for which you're applying, which typically speaking is the full amount of the loan you took out, unless there are any sort of, if there's anything in there that should reduce that amount, but typically speaking, it's the amount of the loan. You'll notice that the documents tab is already clicked finished. And again, as Carl mentioned earlier, the 3508S form does not require any kind of documentation. It's basically an honor code system that the SBA has applied to the loan, and that is they're not going to ask for documentation as part of the application process. And again, it's going to walk you through some demographic information, and then at the very end, you're going to do a signature and consent. So with the 3508S, really what you're doing is filling out this forgiveness amount, where you're just going to plug in the dollar amount. You're going to fill out the general information about your business, and you're going to hit submit there. If you qualify for the 3508EZ, and again, this is for Paycheck Protection Program loans in excess of $150,000 that met the qualifications from that first eligibility check, then it's going to walk you right through into the EZ. And you'll notice that it looks very similar as the previous one, with the exception that you do have to submit some documentation, and you do have to fill out in the system some very general information about the payroll costs, utility expenses, and whatnot. But you don't have to complete a lengthy worksheet. The documentation is a little bit reduced and whatnot. So it is a little bit simplified, but again, because it's $150,000 or more, there's just a little bit more involved in the 3508S. And then finally, the 3508 general form there. And again, this is the most complex of those. It's if you don't qualify for one of the previous applications. And you can see here, it is a much lengthier application. The cash compensation and non-cash compensation, non-payroll costs, those are all lengthy worksheets that you'll have to plug in some information. If you do happen to, if you are required to fill out this form, hopefully you have that information at hand. You can, however, share this application with another user. So if you have a financial advisor that kept all of the records during this time, and you want them to be able to fill out this worksheet or upload documents, you are able to share the application, email this to them. They'll be able to log in using your credentials and upload that information for you. So if you're paying somebody to do that, then this is a great time to be able to leverage that there. But this is what it looks like as it's going to walk you through. Once you've begun an application, and say you don't get all the way to the finish of there, you log back out. Once you have begun that application and you want to continue working on it, again, you'll go back to that primary dashboard when you log in. And there you'll see it says in progress. That's your forgiveness application. And if you click the arrow on the far right, that's going to take you right back into the application, and you're going to pick up where you left out on there. And then again, as you kind of are walking through the application, you'll see there on the left, there's a different bubble that's going to walk you through each of those steps. The example I have on the screen is the 3508S, which again has multiple bubbles for information that you're required to fill out. Those bubbles will be drastically shortened if you have one of the more simplified ones. But at any given time, if you have a question about what the application is asking for, what kind of information they need there, you'll see a little question mark icon. Click that at any time. It's going to give you a little bit more information. You'll also see at the very top right-hand corner of the page, as you're walking through that application and inputting dollar amounts in there, it's going to show you in real time what the estimated forgiveness amount is, especially here on the 3508S. You're going through all these different bubbles. Once you complete a particular bubble, that's going to populate into that forgiveness estimated amount. It's going to kind of show you real time what that looks like. Once you have gone through the entire application in our portal, it's going to be time to submit that application. So the first step you'll want to take is make sure that all of the boxes here are marked as finished to indicate that you've gone through each of those steps there. And then over on the right, you will click Submit Application. And that is going to take you to the final page here, which is your cover period. Carl mentioned the required cover period previously, which is the amount of time during which you must spend the PPP funds. And what you're going to do is you're going to enter that cover period in there. One thing of note, once you have put a date in there, and then you'll see at the bottom where it says confirm selection. Once you put a date and hit confirm selection, you personally can't go back in there and change that unless you ask us to reactivate that application. So if you put a date in there, you hit submit, you find out later that you needed to edit that, send us an email to that PPPFGV inbox or contact your loan officer directly, and they'll be able to let you go back in there and change that. But once you've got the cover period, you hit confirm submission there. And now you're going to see the next time you log into your dashboard, you're going to see at the bottom where it says in review. And that indicates that you have submitted that application and it's currently being reviewed either by First National Bank Alaska, or it is now in the hands of the Small Business Administration. As you go in there and click that box to see what the status is of that application. These are the 5 statuses that you'll potentially see there. So the first is pending validation by the SBA. What that means is the SBA has that application in their hands, and we are waiting for them to actually begin that review process. This is sort of when they potentially will take a look. If they decide that any documentation is missing or any kind of fields aren't filled out, they might deny the review process. They'll send information back to First National to let us know that we then need to get a hold of you. Chad mentioned previously that you might hear from us during the process. So pending validation means the SBA has it. They have not done anything with it. Under review, that indicates that they have accepted the application and they are now going through it to determine the eligibility on that. Fully approved, that means that the amount for which you applied, they've said you're good to go. No further action is required on your part. You do not need to make any payments to the SBA. If you've made any payments previously, but now it's fully approved, we are then going to refund those payments directly to you, as Carl mentioned earlier on that. Partially approved, we mentioned previously that if the SBA only partially approves forgiveness application, payments will begin becoming due. And again, there is that process by which you can kind of say that you disagree with what the SBA's decision was. And that applies to the last one there, which is not approved at all. That's basically saying that the SBA has decided they don't believe that any part of that application should be approved. They will notify First National Bank Alaska directly. They'll give us some information about why that was not approved, at which point we'll be in touch with you to talk about next steps and what that means. And so just a few key takeaways from using our application portal there. Again, Chad mentioned that COVID revenue reduction score. Call your loan officer or send us an email at pppfgv to find out what your score is. If you received a pass score, do not submit any documentation whatsoever. Just go into your application, type in the application forgiveness amount, click submit, and you're done with there. And that applies to the second bullet as well. Even if you're required to submit a few documents there, we encourage you not to submit anything in excess of what the SBA is directly required, because that's potentially going to slow down the application review process. Chad mentioned previously, don't apply through the SBA portal. The SBA has caused some confusion with that. They've created a portal. That portal mainly is created for financial institutions that have not set up their own internal review process, their own portal, which we have. So again, you'll want to use just our portal. Don't apply through the SBA. Don't submit a written application. And again, we will contact you directly there if there's any additional information we need, any additional documentation and whatnot. So that is just a quick rundown of what the portal looks like. Again, with any help, send us an email to that email address there. And now we are going to kind of take some time here to see if we have any additional questions. So we do. So there was a question about the forgiveness application, the status for 2020 applications there. So again, using that portal that I showed previously, that application, I'll put that up on the screen one more time at the end there. But as far as checking the status of that one, that's going to be the other portal that we have there. Carl, I'm going to continue to monitor some of those questions, but I do want to turn it over to you briefly. I'd like you to take some time of just kind of going over what your top 3 takeaways are from this webinar and PPP loan forgiveness applications.
Thanks, Louis. There's a lot of great information today, and we've packed a lot into the last 50 minutes or so. But I would say that the top 3 takeaways that I'd like everyone to remember is just really look at which forgiveness application you need to use. As Louis pointed out, the portal does a great job of walking you through that, but use the simplest one possible. It's going to be quicker for you, quicker for the SBA to review. So use the simplest form possible, find the correct one. When you are doing eligible expense calculations, look at the payroll first. It's required that that be 60% of the expenses. Many of our customers are finding that their payroll alone meets the amount to receive full forgiveness, and you don't need to look to any other source. The payroll documentations, often one of the simplest to find. Right there, you're not looking for individual utility expenses and others. So see if your payroll is enough to cover. It has to be 60%, but in many times it's enough for full forgiveness.
And you can
And
do
finally,
over that amount.
contact
right?
your loan officer if you have any questions through the process. We are here to help. First National Bank Alaska is proud to be in our 100th year of serving Alaskans, and we're proud to be Alaska's trusted PPP lender. And we're going to help everybody get as much forgiveness as possible, and then continue to help people through these challenging times. So, Lewis, those are my top three for today, and I'll turn it over to Chad.
Thanks, Carl. And, I'm going to reiterate, of course, some of the things I said today. And the first one, of course, is, on that revenue reduction score, check with your loan officer, see what your score is. Also, that being said, if you go in there and you qualify for a 3508S application, and that way you can fill that out and you don't have to submit any additional documentation. Once again, you want to do whatever you can to make your application go as smoothly and as quickly as possible. So if you don't have to supply additional information, that is going to be in that streamlined process. The next one is, your payments are due unless your loan is fully forgiven. And so make sure you will receive a statement once it is done. It is either going to say the statement's going to show that it's paid off, or it's going to start showing when your payments are done. I think I saw questions in the Q&A as well. How do I know it's paid off or it's not? You'll receive that statement. If it's a first draw one and it was on the old portal, call your loan officer, ask them what that status is. The last point that I'm going to tell you is, leverage the PPP forgiveness FAQs and also the application hints on that Atlas portal. They're a great resource. They really are. They're going to answer most of your questions, and it's going to help you move along that process really quick. So, Lewis, just like to tell everyone I think it's going to be a good experience. We've had great experiences with these forgiveness applications. At the offset, we really weren't sure how it was going to go, how fast the process was going to be. There was a lot of unknowns. We've already been through over 2,000 plus applications that we've submitted to the SBA. In most cases, it was easier than what we thought it would be. We've actually received very few requests for additional information from the SBA. We did have some, but not as many as we thought that could be out there. And part of that, I think, is that we've done a really good job of the loan officers and our customers submitting really good packages to the SBA. And that's made all the difference. And we've seen some of these applications just go through very quickly. So keep up the good work. And I imagine this round will be just as successful as the first one.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Carl. And we do have more time, and we do have a number of questions here that I appreciate everybody submitting that I'll go through. This question is a great one because this also, it's a terminology thing that has confused pretty much everybody. And we discussed earlier with the COVID revenue reduction score as applying to second draw loans, which kind of has been confused with the fact that 2021 was sort of the second round of Paycheck protection funding. And so with regards to the COVID revenue reduction score, when we say second draw loans, we are referring to borrowers who received a first loan and now have also received a second PPP loan. It does not matter whether that first loan came in 2020 or 2021. Second draw would indicate that they got a second loan, and that's where this COVID revenue reduction score applies. And the reason that it only applies to the second loans is the first Paycheck Protection Program loan did not carry a revenue reduction requirement. So businesses were able to get that regardless of what that 2019 to 2020 revenue reduction looked like. For a second loan, they had to show that, and that's what that revenue score. So great question. And so, yeah, so one again, second draw loan, regardless if you got the first loan in 2020 or 21, the second draw loan is the second one that you received. Couple other things here. And so question is about how much payroll should be used on the forgiveness amount. We recommend you input all of the payroll expenses that you incurred during that cover period. The requirement is that at least 60% of Paycheck Protection Program loan funds are used on payroll. If you were able to demonstrate that 100% of your eligible forgiveness amount was spent on payroll, put that entire amount there, and that's going to be as easy as possible. You won't even have to put anything about rent or mortgage interest or utilities. That the payroll itself can satisfy that. Couple other things here.
And Louis, I think someone asked, I agree with you, man. If you can do it, show 100%, even if it goes over that, that's great. It just makes it easier on us. Also, I think there was a question asking about the employee tax credit. We would just recommend on that you consult with your CPA and how that might impact that tax credit. We don't believe it will, but I don't think the two are related. If you submit if your PPP loan was $100,000, you submit $120,000, you can demonstrate $120,000 worth of payroll. That's great. It's what you can demonstrate that the money was used for. So that's an easy one.
Thanks, Chad. We had another question about the difference between the cover period and the maturity date and the difference between those. And so the cover period is the period of time during which those PPP funds must be used. The maturity date of the loan is determined by when you receive that loan and the amount of time that the SBA has decided that you have to repay that loan. And so just going back, loans issued prior to June 5th of 2020 have a maturity date of 2 years from the date the loan was dispersed, and loans issued after June 5th, 2020 have a maturity date of 5 years from the date the loan was dispersed. So you can go back, see when that was, and that maturity date is going to factor into what those monthly payments are going to be. As Carl mentioned previously, you will receive a loan statement from us if a payment is due, typically 15 days before that, and that's going to have detailed information about the full loan amount. But cover period is the period of time during which you must spend those funds, and the maturity date is how long from the end of when you got those funds that you have to pay back, which will dictate what your monthly payment is going to be. So again, I'm just going to keep going through here. We do have some questions in here that are a little bit more in depth. That might be a good opportunity to have either Chad or Carl or somebody else go in there, give you a call, send you an email, and be able to answer those more in depth there. And so we do have a transcript of all the questions that you asked here. And so we will be able to answer those questions directly. Some additional resources that the SBA has made available to you, and we will email this to you as well, but here are some supporting documents that they've offered, some frequently asked questions, and some information about the loan forgiveness. So this is offered directly from the SBA. And again, you can email us. So that email address that you'll see at the bottom of the page, pppfgv@fnbalaska.com. Use that email address for any questions about the forgiveness process, terms, eligibility. If you need to get a new username for that portal, use that as well. Of course, if you know your loan officer, reach out to them directly. They'll be able to help as well. But we do have that dedicated email inbox for that. And again, that webpage address there, the webinar webpage, we're going to have a recording of today's webinar. And as I mentioned, we also have a recording of last month's webinar, which shows a walkthrough of the application portal for your 2020 loans. I'm going to go back to those web pages.
And Louis, any of the, I mean, we were hopefully able to answer most of the questions in the Q&A, but if we don't feel like we did, we will reach out to those individuals with answers the best we can. I know I saw one in there that asked about the revenue reduction and calculating that. You know, just answering that one real quick. It's year over year or quarter to quarter. If it gets a little more specific than that, then talk to your loan officer and they can help you with that.
Thanks for clarifying that, Chad. Appreciate that. So one more time, this is the web page that you'll go to in order to begin your 2021 forgiveness application. And that applies to all loans that you took out in 2021 for Paycheck Protection Program. So first draw, second draw, both of those will be used on that same portal. You'll be using that to begin your application, continue it, check the status. That's the portal you're going to use. And for 2020 PPP loans, it is a different portal address there. And that's the address portal that you'll see on the screen there. I'll leave that there for just a few moments. But again, we will be in touch with you for some of the questions that we weren't able to answer today. Reach out to us at any point for more information. I'll say one more time, this was asked previously. The portal is open now to accept applications. So both for 2020 loans and for 2021, if you're ready to go, get in there, start that application. And again, first contact us to find out if you have a pass score for the revenue reduction. So one more time, Chad, Carl, thank you both for going through all of the information. And to all of our guests, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate all of the thoughtful questions that you asked in advance as well as during this to really help us get through to make sure that we took the time to get through the information that needed be. And with that, thank you everyone and take care.